Okay, bringing in Dennis Kucinich. This is Ian Trottier for the Discussion of Truth. Bringing in Dennis Kucinich. He's going to be talking about addressing his newest book, A Division of Light and Power. He's the former representative from the state of U.S. representative from the state of Ohio from 1997 to 2013. Let's bring in Dennis right now. You have tuned in to Discussion of Truth. This is Ian Trottier. You can find me at discussionoftruth.com or Ian Trottier and go under my research tab. Donate to the program as I am. We are self-funded, and we are getting an incredible amount of support. But from the outside, but primarily self-funded in regards to financing. Let's bring in Dennis Kucinich, and we appreciate you listening to the show.
This is Dennis.
Dennis, Ian Trottier, welcome to Discussion of Truth. Thank you for your time. How are you, sir?
Good, very good.
Fantastic, and I thank your manager or publicist, whoever you're using, for the introduction. I want to address with you. First off, let me give you a moment to give a brief introduction for listeners. I have mentioned that you are the U.S. representative for the state of Ohio from 1997 and 2013. You have written a few books, and I'd like you to talk about that. But the Division of Light and Power is your most recent book. Dennis, give listeners a brief introduction of yourself, and we'll get into your book.
Sure, thanks very much. Well, the book is the Division of Light and Power, and it reflects my experience as a 23-year-old member of Cleveland City Council, preliminary to my becoming the youngest mayor in America at age 31.
Wow. In
Cleveland. And so my experience includes city council, clerk of courts, mayor, state senator, U.S. representative, twice a candidate for president, and that's on the public side. I also have a resume on the private side as well. But this book is important because anyone who's concerned about government and how it works and what the behind-the-scenes machinations are about and where the centers of power are in a community and who's really making the decisions. This book is a roadmap to an understanding of what a democracy should be, but sometimes, sadly, what it actually represents.
Right. And what does it represent? What are you saying here, Dennis?
Well, what I'm saying is that we often elect people, but we really don't know who's running things. We think the people we elect run things.
Well
but
said.
This book shows that there are other centers of power the public's often not aware of. I write at the beginning of the book that City Hall was not just the building on East 6th and Lakeside. It was also the boardrooms of the banks, of the utility monopolies, of the meeting places of the mob. People wondered where City Hall was. Well, I found out, and I ended up fighting City Hall, and I was the mayor.
This is incredible, Dennis, you've really responded to that question in a way that piques my interest, and you've hit the head on the nail as far as I'm concerned. I'm glad that you have just addressed those issues, because this is becoming more and more important for Americans to understand. Currently in the state of the country, currently, and look, just so that you understand, what I like to do for my listeners is I encourage them to look past the political lines. This is what I personally do, Dennis. And I say, hey, look, if there's, you want to fight for one party or another party or the independent or green party or whatever it may be, let's get past that. Get past that. It might be fun to debate or whatever it may be. And certainly all sides typically have very valid points to consider. And that's part of what you're saying, democracy and all working kind of the crux out to live together well, but we're all hinging in the United States. We're all hinging on that Constitution. So that's kind of what I like to do, Dennis. And I'm glad you responded to that. Let's put listeners back in that seat as the youngest mayor ever elected. in the United States. What was that like for you, and why were you elected at that age, Dennis?
Well, I was elected on a promise to save our municipal electric system from a takeover by this utility monopoly.
Wow.
And I actually started the campaign to save it while I was a member of council. The campaign continued while I was elected clerk of courts, the second highest elected office in Cleveland, administrator of the courts. And I won office on the promise to save the electric system. But while I was involved in the campaign, to start the campaign to block the sale, which was underway in city council, a high-powered rifle shot was fired and towards my house and missed my head by a fraction of an inch.
Holy smokes.
Later on, police intelligence informed me when I was mayor that there was an active plot, assassination plot. And then later on, after I left office, it all became public when a U.S. Senate subcommittee investigation on organized crime in the Midwest revealed that the mob had plans to assassinate me while I was mayor. And police intelligence told me it all went back to my stand in blocking the sale.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. How we just lost Dennis as he's getting into some of the nuts and bolts here of very interesting how we just lost Dennis. Okay. Anyway, so I'm on Skype with Dennis. I'm calling him on Skype. Let's bring him back. Get Dennis Kucinich back here. Interesting how that happened. Go ahead, Dennis. Pick up from where you left off.
Yeah, what I was saying is that a U.S. Senate subcommittee on organized crime investigating the assassination attempt decided that there was, in fact, a plot. And police intelligence at the time said it had everything to do with my blocking the sale of Muni Light to this utility monopoly. It was at that time, it was a deal that was worth over $500 million. And keep in mind, that was many years ago. So, this is a story that of what it means for a young person to stand up and speak out, for a concerned citizen to get involved, for the efforts that have to be relentless in challenging these powers which try to pretend they're omnipotent. And at the same time, it really shows you that democracy can work if people get involved. And I was able to inspire the people of Cleveland to get involved to protect their own interests. What happened in Cleveland was an unprecedented event in American history. And maybe only because I happen to be an insider writing about it. It's also possible these things go on behind the scenes everywhere. But, I was able to expose it.
And were you seeing some of this fraud? Getting away from your book, but were you seeing some of this fraud early on as a council member that caused you to run for mayor? You wanted to expose it?
The book is about the journey. The book begins with the journey of a young councilman just elected. Book opens up with the lights going off in downtown Cleveland at Christmas time. And I called, I was just elected. I hadn't taken office yet. I called what was known then as the Division of Light and Power. That was Muni Light. That's where I get the title of the book. And I said, hey, what's going on? And then that man explained to me that the private utility was doing things to block the public utility, our Muni Light, from being able to function. And that set me on a journey. I started asking questions. And the more questions I asked, I started to see a deep kind of corruption going on that the community was not aware of. And I was the one who exposed it. And that's just the opening part of the story. It goes on to when I was elected mayor. And these interest groups tried to block me at every turn in my efforts to save our system. And eventually, on December 15th, 1978, the power of the banks, who were partners in business with this utility, went against the community. They denied the renewal of the city's credit on loans I hadn't even taken out. They tried to force me to sell the system. They said, if you don't sell, we're not going to renew the city's credit. I said no. They put the city of Cleveland into default, an unprecedented event in American history. The people then voted to tax themselves, to take us out of default on these loans I hadn't taken out. And the tax passed. The banks had committed to renewing the city's credit if the tax passed, which would have not only paid off the notes, but had created more money than the city really needed. And the banks reneged and kept us in default until I left office, and continued to demand the sale of our electric system, which the people also approved by 2-to-1 margin. So this is a story of a struggle for a democratic tradition. It's the story of a struggle for control in a community, and ultimately, it raises the question as to whether or not democracy works, and the only way it works is through our involvement.
And you sound to me, Dennis, like a John F. Kennedy Democrat. I think both parties are, again, not to reiterate, but there's issues we have in both parties, radicalism on both sides, if you will. But to me, you speak to me of some of those core values, those patriotic values that JFK was standing up for. Let me just run this by you, Dennis, and see if you've got anything out there. Cleveland, something came to my mind when you mentioned Cleveland, and certainly this is what came to mind. J.D. Rockefeller, of course, we've had an issue with monopolies and antitrust in our country, and that's one of the large banking and economic challenges that we face, whether it's Microsoft or Facebook or Google. How do we define these things? I don't know the laws that well, but where have they overreached wherever they overreached their power? Talking about, for instance, censorship and that sort of thing. But John D. Rockefeller did business out of Cleveland, born in upstate New York, but did business in Cleveland. And we're talking about financial corruption. Through your research or your knowledge, was there somehow any of this involved with the Rockefeller Foundation or family? At any of this turmoil in Cleveland that you were bringing to light?
What's interesting, the short answer is no. No, this was about Cleveland Trust Bank, which they weren't connected with at all, and about the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company, which they had no interest in whatsoever. And I will say that that the Rockefeller family, John D. Rockefeller made a lot of money in Cleveland. The Rockefeller family has ended up helping Cleveland over the years. And, I didn't have any dealings with them, but I just want to make sure that the record is set straight, that not only were they not involved in any of these horrible events that these corporations pulled, but that family, especially the later generations, have been very supportive of various programs in Cleveland, particularly the arts.
Okay, yeah. Nothing of interest though. There's nothing that you feel would be they've been supportive of the community, but there's no banking affiliation. Nothing that you found that connected.
None at all.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. So what is the state of Cleveland today? Who did these people, once they got you out, and of course there's an assassination attempt. Once they got you out, did they get their person in? Who got in? And what's the what's the impact that we're looking at today?
But it's almost like the other. Whoever followed me, it doesn't matter. What mattered was that when it came my turn as mayor of a city, even though I was so young, and they probably figured they could push me around and make anything they wanted to happen, even though I was so young, I stood up for the people of the city. And who followed me, it's like, they kept the city into default, and they helped to affect the next election as a result. But, it wasn't about the person who followed me. It was about these banks that decided that they were going to try to overturn the government a duly elected government. I mean, that's pretty shocking, actually, when you think about it. You hear these stories happening in other countries, but this happened in an American city, and it's dangerous because it shows you the kind of how financial power can threaten our government itself. That's something that Jefferson worried about, and we have to be concerned about how financial power can be massed to try to direct the government to do things that's against the interests of the people.
And have you found, during your time, and you served a couple of decades on the Hill, have you found any other elements of that type of corruption in the government from banking influence that listeners should know about or that alarmed you?
I mean, of course, the subprime meltdown was all about banks booking no-doc, low-doc loans and creating what's called collateralized debt obligations, which were then, securities that were bundled and sold upstream and pyramiding wealth that didn't actually exist, which created the collapse of the market in 2008. So absolutely. I mean, it was a multi-trillion-dollar disaster for the American homeowner. Many people lost their homes and their businesses. And that, again, was the result of a lack of government attention to what the banks were doing. Look, I was chairman of a congressional investigative subcommittee that actually investigated the subprime meltdown. And it was totally manipulated by banks who were not properly regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Comptroller of the Currency.
What are your
and the Federal Reserve?
Talk about that a little bit, Dennis. Talk about the Federal Reserve, because a lot of literature that I've come across, and I like to address research that was done in the late 60s and 70s out of Stanford. A fellow that walked away from his fellowship at the Hoover Institute. His name is Anthony Sutton, and he wrote extensively about the Federal Reserve and writing that it may not necessarily represent the people, and it might represent more the bankers. What are your thoughts in regards to the Federal Reserve?
Well, you have to remember the money. I brought the Federal Reserve to account because they looked the other way. Well, National City Bank in Cleveland was booking these low-doc, no-doc loans, knowing people couldn't pay them back, but they didn't care. They just wanted the numbers so that they could build these collateralized debt obligations and turn them into high-flying securities. So, yeah, the Fed knew what was going on, and they chose to do nothing. But you have to go back to 1913 when it was created. It wasn't created to do anything but to keep control of finance in the hands of private banks, as opposed to the government being able to meet the needs of the people without having to borrow money.
Now, let you talk about Thomas Jefferson, and the Constitution does give Congress the power to coin money. 1913, Woodrow Wilson signs the Federal Reserve Act, like you're talking about, and I do address this on the show, which then gives, as you're saying, power. It takes power from Congress and it gives it to these private bankers. Is that a system that is conducive with a democratic society, or does that need to be changed, in your opinion, Dennis?
Well, I've introduced Bill H.R. 2990 to the National Emergency Employment Defense Act, which would modify the role of the Federal Reserve and would enable the government to be able to meet the needs of the people whenever there was a financial crisis or health needs or infrastructure needs. The government should be able to do that, but right now it can't because of the way the Federal Reserve Bank plays a role in structuring the monetary system. Now, I want to take this back to the division of light and power, because that's the book I'm talking about.
Thank you. Yeah.
And what it showed is that on a local level, banks can exert extraordinary power. And it was up to me to stand up for the people of Cleveland to make sure that the power the banks were exerting in Cleveland was not going to result in our city losing its control of its municipally owned electric system would provided power at a reduced cost to a third of the city. So I'm very adamant about the importance of democratic principles in governance, and this book, The Division of Light and Power, is a clear example of when a young person takes on a challenge of being an elected official and doesn't play ball with the corporate interest, how you can actually change the history of your city. And that's what I did. Did I know it at the time? Look, I did everything I could to stand up for the people. I didn't know how it would turn out. We saved the electric system. It still exists today. I didn't know I'd have a political career coming back because it looked like it was destroyed when the banks put us into default, because people didn't understand that. But today, I'm because people are now aware of what happened. They appreciate that I took a stand, but it took many, many years for people to understand what happened. I mean, this story began in 1969. So I'm talking about a trajectory that goes not only, the story itself goes from 69 to 79, but my involvement on these issues is telescoped into a future that now, the arc of it is way over 50 years. So, I'm in a unique position with the kind of experience that I have, but also having taken on fights that others would definitely not want to even try. But to get results.
For president, I have had former presidential candidates on the program, including Cynthia McKinney. I've had Alan Keyes. Those are the two that come to mind. If I've had others, they're not coming to mind at the moment. And you're definitely my kind of candidate. Is there something that listeners, and you've already said it, which is what needs to happen? A democracy doesn't function unless everybody's getting up and speaking and being active. But is there something that can be applied, that you applied to the city of Cleveland that made you a target? It sounds like you were successful in your implementation. Is there something that can be applied to the broader country today?
Yeah, don't be afraid. That's number one. People need to know that these groups that try to intimidate people to stop action, that they're not all powerful. There's a power that's much bigger than them, and you can't be afraid. That's the first thing. The second thing is you really got to pay attention to what's going on in your community. When things don't make sense, you have to understand that there's always the possibility that what's going on is going against the interests of the community. So, I just want, my book is about the importance of an informed electorate, but it's also a wild story of corporate espionage, corporate sabotage, interference with banks and monopolies with the workings of a city government. It's about mob involvement, assassination attempts. There's never been a book written like this with respect to what actually is going on inside government by somebody who was not just a witness to it, but who was inside and stood against it as the young mayor of Cleveland. So I'm looking, I appreciate a chance to be on your show. And I've got to go to another interview right now, but I want to thank you for this moment to be able to speak to people. And the book is The Division of Light and Power, and it's available everywhere. If your local bookstore doesn't have it, ask them to order it. And thank you so much for this opportunity to be on the show.
Dennis, you're my kind of American. We've had some great Americans in the history. You're one of them. You're an American hero, and thank you for your work. You are welcome. Last question, very quickly: Do you own the movie rights?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, we haven't. We have given only the book rights out, and the short answer is yes.
Dennis, I look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thanks for all that you do.
Thank you. Bye now.
Dennis Kucinich, and look, I'm going to echo what he said, and he said it repetitively. He ended by saying that, Dennis, look, if you don't get involved, folks, then your country gets taken from you, and your democracy gets taken from you. Your rights get taken from you. I think he thanked me, if I recall that, and I look back on the words exchange. I think he thanked me for aligning him, from my view, to that of JFK. JFK, one of the greatest American heroes. And you know what? I did not realize that he had run for president. I mean, come on. This is what I pull back with. And I've spoken to Pete Sessions. He's a Republican. Get past the political divide. Okay, each party has good policies, but don't get caught up. This is my recommendation. Don't get caught up. Don't say, oh, hey, Republicans are all bad people. Oh, Democrats are, Green Party, they're just weird, or whatever it may be. Folks, none of these parties existed in 1776. None of these parties existed when the Mayflower left Dartmouth to land on Plymouth Rock. What existed was freedom, liberty, justice, free speech, or desire for, free press, freedom of religion. That's what existed, the desire for, and the desire to create a governance based off of those principles. And if you don't exercise those principles, you will lose them. So that was an honor. That was an honor to speak with Dennis and to understand and know his history and what he's doing. Get the book. Buy it for yourself. Buy it for a friend. The Division of Light and Power. Served as the U.S. Representative from Ohio from 1997 to 2013. Dennis John Kucinich. And until next time, be awesome.